What if Moses didn't part the sea through divine power, but advanced technology? What if Ezekiel's flying wheels were drones? Could ancient prophets have been time travelers from the future? This series follows the strange clues scattered across history, scripture, and archaeology. From burning bushes to apocalyptic visions, we'll unravel the secrets of prophets who may not have been divine, but displaced. Stay until the final chapter, where we reveal the terrifying purpose they may have had. Chapter 1: Enoch vanished. There is a man in the ancient texts who simply vanished. No death, no burial, no fanfare, just gone. His name was Enoch, and according to one of the oldest books of the Hebrew Scriptures, he lived for 365 years. Then he was no more because he walked with God. That phrase alone has puzzled generations. What does it mean to walk with God so closely that you cease to exist on earth? Most treat it as divine mystery, but what if the truth was stranger? What if he didn't die because he was retrieved, extracted by beings who had placed him here for a mission that was finally over? This chapter explores that eerie possibility, because when we peel back the theological layers, something begins to shimmer underneath the surface. Enoch may not have been a prophet in the conventional sense. He may have been a traveler, a recorder, and perhaps the first human in history to leave, not for heaven, but for another timeline entirely. Before his disappearance, Enoch lived a life marked by curious silences. Little is known about him in the canon texts, just a few cryptic lines sandwiched between genealogies, hinting that he was different, too different. Unlike other patriarchs who lived centuries longer, Enoch's age matches the days of the solar year 365. An odd coincidence or something encoded? Some traditions say he was taken to observe the workings of heaven, but what if the realm he entered was not celestial, but technological? According to the ancient Book of Enoch, a banned and largely forgotten manuscript, he journeyed through layers of heaven filled with blinding lights, metallic structures, and flying watchers. Could these not be metaphors, but confused descriptions of advanced facilities? Orbiting stations? Dimensional gateways? Enoch's writings sound more like the log of an astronaut than a mystic. And if that book is a mission journal, it may hold the first clue. Enoch was not simply favored by the divine. He was working with someone, reporting back. The phrase that he walked with God has echoed across millennia, often interpreted as a metaphor for piety. But in stories passed down orally long before the written word, that phrase may have held a far more literal meaning. What if Enoch wasn't walking in faith, but walking alongside a guide, a being far older and far more advanced than he was? Many ancient cultures speak of sky beings, watchers, or shining ones who came from above and chose certain humans to instruct or accompany them. Enoch fits this pattern too well. He is described as having access to knowledge no other man possessed. Astronomical cycles, earthquakes, the motion of the stars, and he wrote obsessively, compiling this information as if documenting it for someone else. Maybe not for his generation, maybe not even for ours. The notion that he walked with God may be a veiled record of his time spent under the direct supervision of an entity far beyond human comprehension. Across the world, in radically different timelines, cultures have whispered of chosen ones who were lifted into the sky, and their stories often follow the same strange rhythm. Bright lights, sudden silence, loss of time, and then an inexplicable return, or in Enoch's case, no return at all. It mirrors the modern accounts of alien abductions. Consider the parallels, the missing time, the bizarre insights given to the abducted, the compulsive need to record or warn others afterward. These aren't just thematic coincidences. They form a template repeated throughout history. The abductee becomes prophet. The prophet becomes myth. But perhaps what we've always labeled as divine visitation is instead intertemporal extraction. Was Enoch the first abductee, or was he the first volunteer? A scout, embedded deep in ancient civilization, watching the patterns of Earth unfold until it was time to leave? His absence didn't lead to mourning. It led to reverence, because everyone knew he had been taken, not stolen, but summoned back. The Book of Enoch, long excluded from most religious canons, reads more like science fiction than scripture. It describes great machines of fire and metal, guardians in gleaming armor, portals of light, and journeys through vast corridors of time. One section even details stars imprisoned in heaven for disobeying divine laws, language that could describe rogue celestial bodies, satellites, or even artificial intelligence. And yet, it was written thousands of years ago, too early by any measure to understand such mechanics. Unless, of course, the writer had seen them with his own eyes. Some have dismissed it as symbolic. But when symbols remain eerily consistent with future technology, it begs a deeper question. Was the Book of Enoch the earliest eyewitness account of an interdimensional civilization? His words suggest he traveled through what he calls heavens. But could these heavens be layers of time itself? Places above, not vertically, but temporally? And was Enoch mapping not paradise, but the structure of the timeline? Imagine for a moment that Enoch's mission wasn't spiritual, but strategic. A traveler from a distant future, or perhaps a branch of humanity long since evolved, sent back to record, observe, and steer. It would explain why he vanished at precisely 365 years. A closed cycle. It would explain why his knowledge far exceeded anything typical of his age. And it would explain why so many cultures speak of him in hushed awe, despite his minimal mention in mainstream texts. His disappearance is too clean, too coordinated. No decay, no dispute, just absence, as if someone came for him, extracted him. The kind of removal not designed for death, but for debriefing. If Enoch was inserted into early human history, it makes sense that his mission had limits. Maybe he wasn't here to save anyone. Maybe he was just watching, monitoring how civilization bloomed after Eden. And when his time was up, the sky opened, and history lost him. The behavior of those around Enoch is also telling. There is no record of people searching for him, mourning him, or questioning his fate. Instead, his departure is treated as something sacred, almost expected. Could it be that his presence was always a mystery? That he didn't age like others, didn't behave like others? Perhaps he was never fully one of them. An embedded observer placed in the early generations of humankind to understand their evolution. This would explain his status as a kind of anomaly among patriarchs. The one who didn't die, the one who left no bones, no grave, no relics, only books. If his role was surveillance or guidance, then the Book of Enoch becomes a kind of black box, a time capsule, not for the ancients, but for those who would one day decode its meaning. Perhaps he knew it would be buried. Perhaps he trusted someone Someone would find it when the time was right. And what about those he wrote about? The Watchers, the fallen ones, beings who came down from the sky and taught humans forbidden knowledge, metallurgy, cosmetics, enchantments. They rebelled, he said, and were punished. But from a different lens, the story reads like a science fiction mutiny. A team of advanced beings violate their mission parameters. They interfere with local development. They breed, mix, contaminate, and the system reacts by locking them out, crashing the program. Enoch wasn't just a prophet. He was a whistleblower, the one who documented the interference. This raises an even deeper possibility. Was Enoch not just recording history, but preventing a breach in the temporal code? Were the Watchers not angels, but rogue agents from the same future timeline? And was Enoch's return not retirement, but reassignment? If the Watchers broke the rules, Enoch enforced them with pen instead of sword. A silent guardian in the timeline's earliest hour. His return to the future, if that's what it was, may have been planned from the start. A mission that ends when a specific window in time closes. Perhaps time travelers don't age as we do, or maybe they're allowed only a fixed lifespan to prevent contamination. That might be why 365 appears again. A full rotation. 1 year in the cosmic cycle of observation. He fulfilled his task. He wrote what he saw. He left behind a record shrouded in mystery. Then he left, not for judgment, not for reward, but because the gate opened and it was time. Time travel may not involve metal machines and blinking lights. It may be encoded into biology, genetics, awareness, and Enoch, above all, may have possessed that code. His life was short, his impact immeasurable, and his story eerily timeless. If he wasn't from here, he blended well. If he was human, he wasn't only that. He was more, something between visitor and participant. But if Enoch was sent, someone must have sent him. And that opens the door to something bigger. Was his mission part of a larger pattern? Are there others like him embedded throughout history, watching from the shadows of myth? Enoch may have been the first, but not the last. His story ends with silence, but history keeps echoing it. Prophets who see too much, sages who disappear, strange lights in the skies, visitors in fire and cloud. The pattern continues. And the more we dig, the more it seems orchestrated. If Enoch was extracted, where did he go? And more importantly, why was he here in the first place? The silence around him feels curated, as though someone wanted him remembered but not understood, as though the truth of his mission is still classified, locked beneath language, metaphor, and time itself. Until someone finally starts to ask the forbidden question. What if he never came from Earth at all? In the centuries after Enoch vanished, civilizations began to record stories that felt strangely familiar. Across Sumeria, India, Mesoamerica, tales emerged of sky beings, secret knowledge, and men chosen to walk among the stars. Perhaps these weren't isolated myths, but fragments of a larger operation. A network of time travelers or temporal agents, tasked with influencing key points in our evolution. Enoch may have been the first prototype, the one who proved it could work. And if his mission was successful, others would follow. Each would wear the mask of a prophet. Each would be written into myth. But beneath the robe, they might carry something much older. Data, tools, a memory of a future we can barely imagine. And if we believe their stories, the door never truly closed. It only paused, waiting, because one day the cycle might begin again, and someone else will walk with God. Only this time we may recognize the footprints they leave behind. Now the question echoes. If Enoch wasn't taken by God, but retrieved by time travelers, what does that say about the rest? Are we reading divine intervention or historical maintenance? The idea sounds wild. It sounds impossible. But what else explains the silence? The perfect vanishings? The advanced knowledge? In the next chapter, we step into another mystery. A man who didn't disappear, but who saw something in the sky so strange, scholars are still arguing over it. What Ezekiel witnessed might not have been divine glory, but mechanical descent. The next clue isn't hidden in absence. It's hidden in motion, and wheels within wheels might take us closer to the truth. Before we continue to chapter 2, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, gentle history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now, lower your lights. Maybe let a soft fan hum in the background and settle in. Let's proceed with tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 2: Ezekiel's Machine. In the barren land of exile, a man looked up and saw something that defied the laws of the ancient world. Not a god, not an angel, but a structure hovering, glowing, shifting like a machine alive with purpose. This man was Ezekiel, a priest exiled in Babylon, and what he witnessed on the banks of the Chebar River has haunted theology and science alike. His writings describe wheels within wheels, radiant beings, fire that moved like intelligence, and a platform that rose and fell with a terrifying hum. For centuries, scholars called it a vision. But what if it wasn't? What if Ezekiel didn't imagine these things? What if he saw them? Not divine imagery, but technology. Not prophecy, but a landing. And if that's true, then his writings become something more. Not scripture, but a field report. A record of contact. A record of a moment when the skies opened and something entered that wasn't supposed to be there. The craft Ezekiel described was unlike anything imagined in his time. A great storm approached from the north, glowing with fire and lightning, surrounded by a brilliance that shimmered like polished metal. Emerging from it were 4 living creatures, each with multiple wings, faces, and the legs of a calf that sparkled like burnished bronze. This is not the language of poetry. It's the language of struggle, trying to describe something for which no words exist. Ezekiel grasped at metaphors because he had no frame of reference for machines, robotics, or propulsion systems. But the detail is overwhelming. The creatures moved in unison, darting in all directions without turning, perfectly synchronized like drones guided by a master signal. Above them stretched a crystalline platform, and above that a throne. It reads like the structure of a spacecraft descending layer by layer. Living interfaces, mechanical constructs, command deck, and the entire structure moved with the precision of a machine, not the grace of a spirit. The wheels themselves are the strangest part. Ezekiel calls them wheels within wheels, a phrase that has confused scholars for centuries. But seen through a modern lens, the description becomes chillingly clear. interlocking gyroscopic systems, counter-rotating mechanisms, stabilizers designed for hovering. Ezekiel notes that the wheels were full of eyes all around. Were these actual eyes or sensors? Lenses? Tracking systems? He says the spirit of the creatures was in the wheels, suggesting a direct interface between pilot and platform. This isn't spiritual poetry. It sounds like biomechanics, cybernetic linkages, the merging of biological intelligence with advanced engineering. Ezekiel was describing a craft, and he didn't even know what the word meant. Every detail matches what we would expect from a controlled aerial vehicle. But more than that, it behaved as if it had a purpose. It wasn't just showing off. It was descending for something, or someone, and Ezekiel, alone and watching, may have been its intended audience. He called it the glory of the Lord. But glory in ancient texts doesn't always mean divine essence. Sometimes it means presence,
Manifestation.
visibility. The glory wasn't just light. It was movement, structure, something that landed with force and lifted with power. Ezekiel watched this massive construct ascend with the roar of rushing waters. Today, we'd call it a launch sequence. He described brightness, heat, and vibration, common byproducts of engines or exhaust. The entire event reads more like a vehicle demonstration than a religious revelation. But why show this to Ezekiel? Why him? Was it random, or had he been chosen? Perhaps he had been monitored, observed, prepared. And this appearance was not a vision at all, but a contact, a controlled encounter designed to be remembered and recorded. If that's the case, then the story of Ezekiel becomes something else entirely. Not a prophet witnessing heaven, but a witness struggling to make sense of machinery far beyond his time. The creatures associated with the machine complicate the narrative even further. They weren't ordinary beings. They defied the biology of Earth. For faces, wings that moved with noise like thunder, bodies that glowed like burning coals. If they were alive, they were not human. If they were constructed, they were beyond any robotics we understand. But perhaps they weren't either. Perhaps they were something in between: avatars, biological drones, synthetic hosts for intelligence that existed elsewhere. Ezekiel noted that they moved in perfect sync with the wheels. Wherever the wheels went, the creatures followed. This suggests direct neural integration or programmed behavior. The creatures didn't command the craft. They were extensions of it, parts of a whole. The machine was alive, but not in the way animals are alive. It was intelligence riding structure, thought embedded in metal and light. And Ezekiel, stumbling through language, was doing his best to put that into words his generation could comprehend. The throne above the craft introduces an unsettling element. Someone was seated there, a figure with the likeness of a man, glowing with fire from the waist up and gleaming like molten metal from the waist down. He wasn't described as human, but as something human-shaped, a simulation, a holographic projection, a pilot in a suit. Ezekiel called it the appearance of a man, but wrapped in flame and lightning. It moved with command, with power, and it spoke not with a voice, but with intent. This figure gave Ezekiel instructions, missions, warnings, as if he had a purpose for being there. It wasn't random glory. It was briefing, download, assignment. This raises a terrifying thought. Was Ezekiel being recruited or programmed? given not just a message to spread, but a set of instructions implanted through visual and sonic stimulation. This encounter may have marked the moment Ezekiel became a conduit, not just for prophecy, but for something far more technical. After the encounter, Ezekiel's behavior changed. He became obsessed with detail, measurements, architecture, blueprints. His later visions described the temple of the future, not as a spiritual idea, but as schematics, floor plans, dimensions, ratios. It reads like engineering, as if someone uploaded data into his mind and he was compelled to copy it down. He wrote of sacred geometry, of chambers and gates with exact distances. His vision was no longer fiery or mythic, it became technical, functional, the kind of obsession a man develops after contact with something precise. This shift suggests that what he received wasn't just inspiration, it was programming, a mission directive, a design seeded into him that he could barely understand, but felt the need to replicate. That replication may not have been for his time. It may have been for ours, a trigger waiting for reactivation. And if we ever build what Ezekiel drew, we may find it does something, or opens something. But still, the question lingers. Why Ezekiel? Why choose a priest exiled in Babylon? Broken, isolated, forgotten? Perhaps isolation was the key. Ezekiel was cut off from distractions, from politics, from tribal rivalry. He was alone, vulnerable, available. That made him the perfect candidate for contact. No one would believe his story, and that too might have been the point. The craft didn't need to be seen by many, just by one. One recorder, one messenger. This pattern repeats across other prophets. Solitude, silence, then contact. And in each case, what follows is not just wisdom, but transformation. The idea that Ezekiel was chosen becomes more plausible when you consider his behavior after the event. He didn't treat it like a dream. He treated it like a command. His life realigned. His purpose changed. He became a transmitter. And maybe that was always the point. Not to change his world, but to embed something into history, waiting for someone else to decode it. Some believe Ezekiel's vision was too complex to be a hallucination. Hallucinations are chaotic, fragmented, inconsistent. But his account was structured, logical, layered. He saw motion and responded with engineering. He saw light and responded with measurements. He saw beings and responded with detailed classifications. His brain wasn't breaking, it was processing, interfacing, trying to transcribe something his world had no vocabulary for. This is the behavior of a witness, not a mystic. He wasn't trying to create religion. He was trying to explain something that exploded into his life with all the force of a landing engine. And perhaps that engine wasn't from another world. Perhaps it was from another time. Ezekiel may not have seen aliens. He may have seen humans or post-humans who had mastered the ability to insert themselves into specific windows of history. And if that's true, then his vision wasn't a one-time miracle. It was a stop on a route, a checkpoint in time. Others dismiss this theory, claiming it strips the vision of its divinity. But what if divinity and technology are not opposites? What if advanced technology is how the divine manifests? To Ezekiel, the craft was the glory of the Lord. But to those with different eyes, it may look like a survey ship, a temporal observation deck, something sent to deliver data or collect it. If these prophets are being contacted by travelers from the future, then Ezekiel's experience fits perfectly. He sees the interface, the handlers, the pilot. He receives instructions, and then he becomes the transmission. What he saw may have been far less about religion and far more about continuity, a future trying to stabilize the past, an intelligence trying to embed warnings or designs or seeds into the timeline before something goes terribly wrong. And Ezekiel, alone, shocked and open, became the perfect delivery system for whatever it was they needed to place here. If the craft Ezekiel saw was a machine, then what it left behind may still exist. Not physically, but in code, in his writings, in the measurements and the patterns. Perhaps embedded within the dimensions of his temple are harmonics, frequencies, coordinates, things not meant to be understood in his day. A riddle that would only make sense to a world surrounded by satellites and sensors. A world like ours. The idea that his vision was a map, rather than a prophecy, opens terrifying possibilities. Maybe it wasn't a message for ancient people. Maybe it was a lock, and someday someone may stumble across the key. If the throne Ezekiel saw was a control room, then whoever sat upon it wasn't showing off power. They were delivering something, and when they left quickly as if to avoid detection. But they were seen by one man at the edge of exile, staring into a sky that should have been empty. In the next chapter, we shift from fire in the sky to dreams in the palace. A young man in Egypt interprets a vision that saves a kingdom, but his knowledge is too perfect, his rise too smooth, his accuracy too frightening. And the question follows, what if he wasn't guessing the future? What if he already knew it? We follow Joseph, a slave who became second to Pharaoh, not because he was wise, but because someone had told him what was coming. And maybe, just maybe, he had been told by someone who remembered, someone from the future. Chapter 3, Joseph's Dream Code. In a cold, dark prison cell beneath the Egyptian sun, a young man closed his eyes and saw something no one else could. Not a vision of escape, not a memory of home, but symbols, patterns, fragments of time rearranged into meaning. That man was Joseph, once a slave, soon to be the most powerful figure in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. His rise was meteoric, baffling, unnatural, and it all hinged on a dream, but not his dream, Pharaoh's. A dream Joseph interpreted with flawless clarity. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 thin ones. 7 ears of corn scorched by wind. These images terrified Egypt's king. But Joseph didn't hesitate. He spoke not like a man deciphering riddles, but like someone recalling a sequence. Like he had already seen what was coming. As if it wasn't prophecy at all. It was memory, embedded, activated, or perhaps remembered from a time long after the famine had already happened. No one questioned how Joseph could know what no one else did. They were too desperate for answers. But imagine this. A young man with no formal education, no political alliances, and no power, suddenly catapulted into command of the most sophisticated empire on earth. All because of a dream. Or more precisely, because of how he read it. What if that reading wasn't mystical insight, but data retrieval? A replay of an encoded memory implanted before his birth? The sequence of events was too clean. The warning too specific. 7 years of abundance. 7 years of hunger. Not 6, not 8, not vague allegory, but precision forecasting. It felt less like a divine warning and more like a readout from a future intelligence, sent back in symbolic form to be unlocked at the right moment. And Joseph, consciously or not, may have been the key carrier, programmed with insight he wouldn't understand until history reached the point it needed him most. And then there was the storage plan. After interpreting the dream, Joseph didn't hesitate. He devised an empire-wide strategy to build massive grain silos and ration supplies over the 7 plentiful years. His plan wasn't just reactive. It was preventive, tactical. He described infrastructure no one had even imagined before. How did he know how to do that? His ideas went beyond ancient knowledge. They matched patterns seen in modern disaster mitigation, stockpiling, logistics, and resource mapping. Joseph acted like a man who had studied catastrophe management, not someone simply moved by faith. He had no margin for error, and yet his predictions were executed with chilling accuracy. It's possible that he was guided, or that he wasn't interpreting Pharaoh's dream at all. He was remembering, and the dream, far from a message from the divine, may have been a downloaded trigger, a subconscious code to awaken whatever knowledge lay dormant inside him, knowledge seeded not by gods but by travelers. That dream itself reads like a neural sequence, symbolism over logic, visions over language, the kind of communication used when conventional data transfer isn't possible. Dream encoding is not just science fiction anymore. Modern psychology and emerging technology suggest that the brain can receive, compress, and unpack data in altered states. What if Pharaoh wasn't just dreaming? What if he was the accidental recipient of a temporal signal, something beamed backward in time through a quantum relay, disguised as dream content? Joseph may have been implanted with the cipher that could decode it. In this model, neither man understood what they were experiencing. They were instruments in a larger design, a design orchestrated by someone from a future that had already seen Egypt's collapse, someone who needed to prevent it. And instead of machines, they used minds. Instead of messages, they used symbols. Instead of prophets, they used agents, some aware, some not. Joseph may have been the latter. Egypt's survival hinged on this moment. A famine that would have destroyed the region, rerouted history, and disrupted the evolution of civilization was diverted. And because of that, everything changed. Migration patterns, economic shifts, religious syncretism, all hinged on grain. But look closer and you'll see more than politics. You'll see a footprint, a distortion, a sign of intervention. The timing was too perfect, the resources too well managed. The famine ended almost as if it had been managed, like someone knew the arc of drought and rain cycles ahead of time. What if Joseph's plan wasn't improvisation, but execution? A protocol handed to him mentally piecemeal, unfolding like muscle memory? The silos were built just in time. The distribution rolled out without rebellion. His system was decades ahead of what most kingdoms could manage. This wasn't intuition. It was orchestration. And behind it may lie the hand of a timeline desperately trying to correct itself. If Joseph was a vessel, then who sent the message? And why? Was someone trying to preserve the Egyptian empire as a keystone for future development? Or protect a bloodline? Or prevent an alternate future where the collapse of Egypt leads to wider civilizational breakdown? Prophets are often seen as spiritual messengers, but perhaps some were historical engineers, embedded minds tasked with course correction. If Joseph was one of them, he may have been unaware. But that doesn't matter. The design still worked. His role, from slavery to ruler, reads like the trajectory of someone moved across the board by unseen hands. Betrayed, sold, imprisoned, elevated, not because of chance, but because of structure. A path laid out long before the first betrayal ever happened. And at the center of it all was a dream, a pulse from elsewhere, transmitted not across land, but across time. And Joseph didn't just receive it, he acted on it. We often assume dreams are internal, chemical, emotional, but in rare moments, dreams behave more like transmissions. Compressed messages arriving in symbol form, waiting for the right person to open them. In this framework, Pharaoh wasn't seeing the future. He was being shown the past. Or more accurately, the past is viewed from a future that saw its consequences. A retrocausal message. And Joseph, either by design or accident, was the decoder. Some say his dream interpretations were a divine gift, but perhaps the gift wasn't his to begin with. Perhaps it was uploaded, stored in his subconscious like a sleeper protocol, ready to awaken at the moment it would matter most. When Pharaoh awoke in terror, he called for answers, and only Joseph had the code. That moment may have been the pivot for everything that followed. Joseph didn't just save Egypt. He ensured a timeline stayed intact, a reality preserved by one dream. His position after the dream was strange. Joseph was elevated to second in command almost overnight.
No noble linii.
No military service, no political connections. Yet he was trusted with controlling the empire's food supply, its most valuable resource. Why? Perhaps Pharaoh sensed something he couldn't explain, an authority beyond words. Or perhaps he had been influenced by the same force that sent the dream, an external nudge guiding internal trust. Joseph executed his role with uncanny precision.
No hesitaschen.
No trial and error. He knew exactly how to manage crisis before it arrived, as if he had already lived it. In a world where disaster forecasting didn't exist, Joseph behaved like a systems analyst from the future. His grain silos, ration schedules, and logistical chains were too complex for a slave with no formal training. Unless that training had occurred elsewhere. Not in Egypt, not even in his lifetime, but far beyond it, embedded, not taught. Over time, the famine came exactly as predicted. Crops withered, the Nile dried, but Egypt did not fall, because it was ready, because Joseph was ready. He became the axis upon which two nations spun, Israel and Egypt, and their histories merged because of him. His actions triggered a migration, a cultural fusion, and eventually a tension that would define the Exodus centuries later. One man's dream interpretation shifted empires, but it may not have been chance. What if Joseph's presence in Egypt wasn't just an accident of slavery, but a planned insertion? A seed placed in the soil of history to bloom at the right moment? And if so, the famine wasn't a punishment. It was a test, a fixed point in time that needed careful handling. Without Joseph, the event derails civilization. With him, it becomes manageable. In this light, Joseph's life reads like a designed narrative, not lived, executed. A protocol disguised as a biography. There's a darker possibility, too. What if the famine was not natural? What if it was triggered intentionally to activate the sequence? To test Joseph's ability? Some anomalies hint at rapid climate changes in the region around that time. Could someone have geoengineered a temporary crisis just to nudge the timeline back on track? It sounds unthinkable until you look at the outcome. Egypt's grain became the fuel for cultural expansion. Trade routes opened, populations shifted, and Joseph's descendants stayed in Egypt long enough to influence it from within. Maybe the famine wasn't a disaster. Maybe it was a calibration, an engineered fluctuation to correct a deviation in history. And Joseph, with the knowledge encoded in him, was its handler. Not a prophet in the old sense, but a temporal technician, an editor of cause and effect, inserted to manage a ripple that could have become a tidal wave. The dream wasn't just a warning, it was a mechanism. Centuries later, the story of Joseph remains one of the most retold narratives in religious history. But beneath the robes and the wheat and the weeping brothers, another layer emerges. Pattern of control, a system of signals, and a memory of things that shouldn't be remembered. The dream that saved Egypt may have been a download, a last-minute patch to preserve the world as it was meant to unfold. And Joseph, remembered as a dreamer, may have been much more than that. He may have been part of a team, a chain of interlopers planted across eras to steer key moments back to stability. So the dreams aren't done. They may still be arriving, and the next recipient might not be a pharaoh or a prisoner, but someone yet to dream. Someone who will awaken knowing something they shouldn't, and act as if they've always known it. Next, we follow the man who led slaves through fire, storm, and wilderness. A man who heard voices from a bush that didn't burn, held tablets carved by light, and summoned plagues with the wave of a hand. But what if Moses wasn't chosen by God? What if he was activated by something else, something embedded in the code of time itself, something that waited for a shepherd to become an operator? Chapter 4: Moses and the Sinai Interface. He was alone when it happened, a shepherd in the desert.
No witnesses.
No records, just a man and a flame that did not burn. Moses was tending his flock when he saw it. Fire, resting on a bush, yet the bush remained whole. He approached cautiously, and then the impossible occurred. The fire spoke, not as wind, not as thunder, but with clarity and intention. Words emerged from the flame, and from that moment, nothing was the same. The story has long been told as a miracle, but what if it was something else? What if Moses wasn't hearing the voice of God, but the activation of a system? A voice interface designed to engage once a proximity threshold was crossed? In a time with no language for machines, Moses used the only terms he had. But maybe he had encountered something far more advanced than fire. Maybe he had stepped into a zone where technology passed for divinity. The bush that burned without consuming itself could have been a projection. A holographic emitter anchored to desert stone, programmed to display a flame-like image while delivering voice instructions. Ancient people would have no words for energy holograms, proximity triggers, or remote communication systems. But they understood the supernatural. The anomaly of the bush was only the beginning. From there, Moses became something else.
A conduit.
A leader, but his transformation wasn't organic. It was immediate, precise. After the bush, he moved with direction. as if he were following steps already embedded into his mind. And maybe he was. Maybe what the bush did wasn't just deliver instructions, it uploaded something. A behavioral protocol, a mission script. Moses left the mountain with more than courage. He left with access to knowledge he had never possessed before. And when he returned to Egypt, he didn't plead. He executed. With confidence, with precision, like someone trained or perhaps someone programmed. The next anomalies followed quickly, plagues that arrived not with randomness but with timing, coordinated, strategic, each one escalating the disruption of Egypt's systems. Water, food, livestock, light, and finally the firstborn. These weren't acts of nature. They were operations, controlled chaos. The Nile turned to blood, not over months, but suddenly. Frogs multiplied, locusts invaded, darkness fell, and then death came. But only to the Egyptians. The targeting was selective, intelligent, as if someone had precise genetic mapping or access to environmental control tools. It sounds unbelievable until you imagine someone manipulating ecosystems with geoengineering devices. That kind of precision doesn't come from faith alone. It comes from technology. What if Moses wasn't just calling down plagues? What if he was activating them, triggering sequences embedded in a network long before his time? Each plague followed the last with machine-like regularity. Not wrath, procedure, a controlled dismantling of empire step by step. Then came the escape, pillar of smoke by day, a pillar of fire by night, guiding the people across the desert with no confusion, no wrong turns. This wasn't metaphor. This was navigation. A real-time guidance system lighting the way. It rose. It stopped. It resumed. The people followed. Imagine a drone, hovering above a crowd, lit by artificial flame, pulsing with movement, tracking every step. To the ancient Israelites, it was divine. To us, it sounds like a hovering satellite relay or autonomous beacon system. It never left them, not until they reached the edge of the sea. And even then, it stood between them and their pursuers, casting light over one side and darkness over the other. A field generator, a cloaking system. Moses didn't explain it. He couldn't. He only described what he saw, and what he saw looked like guidance. Something that knew where to go before he did. Something that knew how history had to unfold. The moment at the Red Sea has become legend. Moses raises his staff. The waters part. The people walk across dry ground. Then the sea collapses upon the Egyptian army. Miraculous? Perhaps. But what if the staff wasn't symbolic? What if it was a device? An activation key? A control rod linked to environmental manipulation? The sudden parting of the sea implies force. An atmospheric pulse or magnetic field strong enough to displace massive volumes of water. Impossible by ancient standards. But if someone wanted to create a path through time, this would be one way to ensure its preservation. Moses may have carried not just leadership, but a tool. Something embedded with the codes necessary to trigger environmental control systems already present in the region. Systems buried, camouflaged, dormant, until the right voice spoke the right sequence. And when it did, the waters obeyed, and the people survived. Then came Sinai, the mountain shrouded in smoke. Lightning struck the summit. Thunder echoed like engines. The people were warned to stay away. Radiation, high-frequency interference. Moses alone was permitted to ascend, and what happened at the top changed everything. He returned with tablets, not carved by human hands, but by something else. The text, burned into stone, was precise, uniform, not chiseled, but etched, laser engraved, particle printed. The commandments were more than moral guidance. They were protocols, foundational principles for social structure, laws embedded with symmetry and control. The tablets may have been ancient software, loaded into a man to be disseminated to a population. Moses didn't just carry stone, he carried operating code. And the transmission from Sinai may have been the final piece in a long sequence that had begun with the bush. Voice, fire, plague, flight, command. Each step layered with technology misread as holiness. Moses descended changed. His face, they said, glowed. Radiation exposure, light scattering from energy contact. Ancient texts claimed his skin emitted light. He wore a veil afterward. The people were terrified. He had come too close to something beyond their world. To them, it was the face of the divine. But perhaps it was exposure, a biological signature altered by interaction with high-energy fields. Moses may have been the first recorded human to undergo partial transformation after extended exposure to whatever existed on Sinai's peak. His words shifted. His tone became absolute. He now spoke as one who carried not just authority but source code, instructions that came from elsewhere, instructions that did not evolve organically but arrived fully formed. That kind of certainty doesn't emerge from inspiration. It emerges from download. Moses had been interfaced, not with mystery, with mission, but the narrative doesn't end there. When the people built the Ark of the Covenant, its design came directly from Moses. He gave detailed dimensions, materials, placement instructions. He knew exactly what it should look like. Why? The ark emitted energy. It had to be carried with poles. It shocked those who touched it. It glowed from within. And when it was in battle, it gave victory. This wasn't symbolic. It was functional. Power source. A field generator. A communication array. Perhaps all three. Moses may have been replicating something he saw, schematics imprinted in his mind. The ark was not just a container. It was an interface, and it followed them through the desert like a mobile transmitter. Wherever it went, so did the presence of something else. And Moses was the only one who seemed to understand it. There are theories that Moses was chosen, but what if he wasn't? What if he was built, prepared from birth for the role he would one day fulfill? Raised in the palace of Pharaoh, given access to knowledge and language, removed from the system, then returned. His life unfolds like a sequence, each exile, each return, calibrated. Perhaps his mind was seated early, embedded with access codes, waiting for activation. And when he saw the bush, the system recognized him, not as a prophet, but as a user. And from that point forward, everything he did followed a line. A precise arc through chaos. Moses didn't improvise. He executed. And every miracle can be read as a sequence, process, controlled not by divine randomness, but by design. What if Moses wasn't alone? What if the mountain wasn't just a site of contact, but a site of interface, a location used multiple times across multiple ages to distribute knowledge when humanity crossed a threshold? The tablets weren't the only item of power. They were part of a larger system, an ongoing attempt to steer civilization without revealing the source. Moses was part of that system. His role was transitional. He took a group of wandering slaves and transformed them into a nation with law, ritual, and structure. That kind of leap doesn't happen naturally. It happens with help, with upload. Moses may not have known the full scope, but his actions suggest he was receiving, responding, and the mountain, the bush, the ark, each one a point of transfer. From then to now, in the next chapter, we leave the thunder of Sinai and enter the silence of dreams once again. But this time, it's not famine that's foreseen, but empire. A young man in Babylon sees beasts rising, kingdoms falling, and a future no one has lived yet. But what if Daniel didn't see the future? What if he was shown it by someone who had already been there? By someone who needed him to write it down, not for his time, but for ours. Chapter 5, Daniel and the Chrono-Visions. He was just a boy when it began, taken from his homeland, captive in the heart of Babylon, surrounded by the gold, power, and cruelty of an empire that seemed eternal. But Daniel saw through it. He looked past the palaces and idols. He saw what others couldn't. He interpreted dreams that paralyzed kings. He read signs written in invisible ink across the fabric of time. What others called visions, Daniel treated like briefings, detailed, structured, layered. There was no mysticism in his tone, only clarity. That was what made him different. He didn't act like someone caught in the grip of prophecy. He acted like someone executing a protocol, someone receiving data. Again and again, Daniel accessed visions that made no sense in his own era. Empires yet unborn, kingdoms that would rise and fall in sequence. And still, he wrote with confidence, calm, precision, as if what he saw wasn't speculation, as if it had already happened. The dream of Nebuchadnezzar was the first public test. A golden head, silver chest, bronze belly, iron legs, clay feet, a statue shattered by a stone from the sky. Each part represented a kingdom: Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, centuries apart, all in order, all unfolding just as Daniel described. But this wasn't divine inspiration. It felt too systemic, too linear, like someone had shown him a timeline, carefully curated, stripped of noise. Could it be that Daniel didn't predict the future, but remembered it? That he was handed an encoded visual, a projection from a point far ahead, crafted to match the symbolism of his time? Maybe that's why he never hesitated. He wasn't guessing. He was translating. And the statue wasn't a metaphor. It was a map, a schematic of coming power structures. The stone wasn't mythic judgment. It was intervention, an object crashing into the system at the end. Perhaps Daniel saw a rupture, a course correction. Later came the beasts, 4 of them, a lion with eagle wings, a bear raised on one side, a leopard with 4 heads, a final monster with iron teeth. No natural creature moved like these. No real animal matched their parts. But in modern terms, they mirror geopolitical constructs, hybrid regimes, expanding powers, militarized alliances. Each beast represented not just a nation, but a pattern, archetypes of empire. The final beast broke all the rules, dominated the earth, wore 10 horns, spoke like a man, Sound familiar? Surveillance state, global hegemony. The echoes are eerie. Daniel's vision reads more like a declassified intelligence report than a spiritual dream. The symbols aren't random. They're layered, structured to match specific political sequences. And Daniel understood them immediately. He documented without confusion, as if he'd seen them before, as if someone had uploaded a compacted vision of the 21st century into the brain of an exile thousands of years ago. Among all the figures that appear to Daniel, one stands out: Gabriel, called an angel by tradition, but never described with wings. Just a being, sent to explain, to clarify, to assist in decoding. But what if Gabriel wasn't a divine messenger? What if he was an operative, a contact from the future tasked with managing Daniel's downloads? Whenever the visions grew too dense, Gabriel appeared. His purpose wasn't awe, it was guidance, like a technician helping a user interface with overwhelming data. Gabriel always clarified, never dazzled. And Daniel always accepted his presence, never terrified, like he had encountered him before, or maybe recognized him subconsciously. If Gabriel was part of a mission team monitoring, translating, refining, then Daniel was the terminal, the receiver, the field agent, and what he received was not prophecy. It was pattern recognition, forecasting shaped by probability, anchored in key events already recorded in the source timeline. The most overlooked artifact in Daniel's story is the sealed book. He's told to write everything down, but seal the words until the time of the end. This is not how prophecy usually works. Most prophets share what they see, but Daniel is told to store it, encrypt it, hide it. The sealed book could be a data capsule, a file encoded with contextual keys, meant to be opened only when certain parameters are met. It suggests future access, a reader not yet born, a moment in history when the knowledge becomes relevant again. What kind of book needs to be locked by time? In our age, we use encrypted files, locked until a specific date. Could Daniel's book be the same? A temporal document embedded with time-locked decryption? If so, then Daniel wasn't writing for his people. He was writing for us, for those standing at the convergence point where the beasts stir once more. His gift for interpreting dreams was more than talent. It was a tool. Others around him dreamed, but only he could parse them. This ability was not human intuition, it was algorithmic, as if his mind had been calibrated to receive and decode compressed symbols. It's possible that Daniel was enhanced, genetically, neurologically, or cognitively, by whatever power he encountered. His neural architecture may have been altered to act as a decoding interface. Ancient reports say his mind was sharper than all others. But it wasn't just wisdom, it was pattern detection. He saw connections others missed. Dreams came to him like data streams. Night visions formed in layers, visual, auditory, symbolic. Daniel didn't simply experience these. He indexed them, filed them, organized them. That's not how mystics behave. That's how data analysts operate. And his analysis wasn't for his own enlightenment. It was for continuity, to ensure the timeline stayed within safe boundaries, a safeguard built into time. Even Daniel's survival defied logic. He interpreted dreams that threatened kings. He warned of collapse. He described their empires falling. Yet he was never executed, never exiled. Instead, he was promoted, Why? Because his predictions always came true. Because those in power sensed that he wasn't guessing. He had access. Whether they believed in gods or not, they trusted the results. In a dangerous court, Daniel thrived. That kind of resilience points to something more than political skill. It suggests protection. Perhaps Daniel was under observation, maintained, monitored, allowed to operate so long as he remained aligned with mission objectives. If the future had agents in the past, Daniel would be their prime asset. And his survival, vision after vision, regime after regime, suggests someone was watching, guiding, making sure the stream of data didn't stop until the timeline stabilized, until his task was complete. One of Daniel's final visions involves the rise of a great deceiver, a horn that speaks blasphemy, a figure who changes laws and times. What if this wasn't religious allegory, but a reference to a coming digital dictatorship? A regime that rewrites history, alters memory, edits timelines? The phrase changes times and laws implies someone with control over collective understanding. Today, with algorithms, AI, and media dominance, we see the beginning of such power. Could Daniel have been warned? Could he have seen fragments of what was to come, passed backward through time as warnings? And if so, did he encode solutions? Hidden in the beasts, the numbers, the seals, could there be embedded instructions on how to resist? On how to realign history when the distortion begins? His visions aren't just eerie, they're increasingly urgent. The patterns are re-emerging, the signs are blinking, and the voice that once spoke to Daniel may still be whispering. At the end of his life, Daniel saw something others didn't. The timeline. Not just history, but structure. He described weeks as symbols, days as years, events cascading in sequence. The language was complex because the data was complex. Time itself was breaking down into cycles. What he described may have been an early glimpse at temporal mapping, understanding not just what happens, but when it must happen. Today, this resembles predictive modeling, algorithmic forecasting, and timeline bifurcation. But Daniel had no tools, only visions, and yet he mapped time with accuracy no one could explain. If he wasn't predicting, then he was downloading. And if he was downloading, then someone was uploading from somewhere else. Somewhere that needed him to see just enough, no more, no less, to anchor the pattern, to seal the book, to keep the code alive until it could be reactivated. Now, thousands of years later, people still read Daniel. They argue over his symbols, decode his numbers, watch the world for echoes. Perhaps that was the plan, to embed a signal in a prophet, lock it in a scroll, and let it echo through millennia until the age of decoding arrived, until data scientists, futurists, or digital prophets cracked open what Daniel sealed. If that happens, the visions will not seem divine anymore. They will seem familiar, logical, confirmed, because what Daniel saw may have been our world, our struggles, our endgame, and his words may not be a warning. They may be an instruction manual for what happens when the final beast rises. Next, we cross the sea and find a man in exile, alone on an island, haunted by visions not of nations, but of cosmic collapse. John of Patmos, a man who sees the sky burn, the earth crack, and the future fracture. But what if revelation wasn't madness or prophecy? What if it was the final report of a mission that went wrong? A mission that still echoes through time, waiting to be read, one last time, Chapter 6, John and the Last Transmission. He was the last one, alone on an island, surrounded by sea and silence. The Roman Empire had exiled him to Patmos, hoping to silence him. But isolation didn't shut his mind. It opened it, and what followed wasn't peace. It was revelation. Images poured into John's consciousness. Fire falling from the sky, stars crashing to earth, beasts rising from oceans, entire cities consumed in light. He wrote what he saw, but even he confessed that the meaning was beyond him. But what if it wasn't beyond understanding? What if it was misunderstood because it came from another era entirely? Revelation has often been treated as madness or divine mystery. But what if it was a mission report? A debrief from a traveler sent too far back in time, witnessing things he couldn't explain with first-century words? A record of a timeline collapse? Or worse, a warning that it was already happening again? John's visions began with machinery, lamps, scrolls, seals, trumpets, ritualistic objects described in mechanical tones. Then came creatures that looked like hybrids of animal and armor. Faces of lions, wings of eagles, stingers of scorpions. They flew in formation and delivered pain without death. To some, they sound like symbolic demons, but to others, they read like drone descriptions. Swarms of flying machines, possibly weaponized, guided by AI or remote systems. John had no language for aircraft, metal, or circuits. He used symbols from his world. But beneath the poetic metaphor lies structure, order, sequence. These aren't dreams. They are operations, and they escalate, step by step, as if the planet is being judged or surveyed, phase by phase, each trumpet sounding not just as a mystical alarm, but as a procedural trigger. The seven seals unleash disasters that feel less like metaphysical trials and more like staged collapses. One brings conquest, another war, then famine, then death. Each seal reads like a control protocol, activation stages for engineered breakdowns of civilization. Then come the trumpets, escalating the damage. Rivers poisoned, skies darkened, locusts unleashed, mountains thrown into the sea. These sound like geological anomalies, nuclear strikes, asteroid impacts, and biotechnological plagues. And the final trumpet? It doesn't describe a rapture. It describes a system reset. Lightning, thunder, earthquake, a massive shift, like a code rebooting a broken reality. If revelation is data from the future, then these seals and trumpets may not be metaphors at all. They may be the log files of a last attempt to steer history back on course. Then comes the beast, with control over commerce, with marks on hands and foreheads, with the ability to prevent buying or selling without compliance. For centuries, this has sparked fear, but now it raises questions. In a world of digital surveillance, facial recognition, implanted IDs, and biometric payments, the beast system doesn't sound like fantasy. It sounds like a digital regime, a world where freedom becomes permission, where access requires submission. John described it before such technology existed, which begs the question, was he seeing prophecy or prototype? A system already known to the future, now surfacing in fragments across the globe? And if so, was he shown this to warn us? To give us the language to resist what we cannot yet name? Revelation's language is filled with numbers. 42 months, 7 years, 1,260 days. These are not mystical counts. They're timestamps, operational durations, time blocks that feel more like project phases than divine mystery. What if they mark interventions? Attempts from future agents to insert influence at critical junctures in history. 42 months of surveillance. 7 years of social manipulation. A countdown that wasn't divine, it was technical. John's exile, in this view, becomes not a punishment, but a necessity. Isolation for debrief, containment, maybe even shielding from interference. So he could focus, so he could transmit, so his mind could stabilize long enough to record what he'd seen. The woman clothed in the sun, the dragon cast to earth, a war in heaven. On paper, these are cosmic myths, but they might also be descriptions of orbital warfare. Celestial bodies as satellites, dragons as symbols of invading systems or foreign code. The battle in heaven could be a data war, fought across space-based platforms or quantum communication networks. The woman may not be literal. She could be a representation of Earth's last biological hope, natural life under siege by digital empires. John saw it through a filter of ancient symbolism, but the pattern persists. What he recorded could be a struggle between civilizations, one biological, one synthetic, one born of Earth, one returned from far away. The book of Revelation closes with the idea of a new heaven and a new earth, not repaired, but replaced. Full reset. A new system descending from above, crystalline, perfect, without death or decay. Could this be a simulation? A virtual sanctuary built to protect human consciousness while the real world collapsed? Could John have been shown humanity's last fallback? A constructed utopia running on preserved code? The city he describes has no night, no temple, and no sun because it needs none. Everything is sustained by the source, the Lamb, a server, a generator, an AI shepherding the last survivors? It's speculation. But then again, what about Revelation isn't? Unless it isn't speculation at all. Unless it's backup documentation. John describes being told to eat a scroll, sweet at first, then bitter in his stomach. This sounds ritualistic, unless it refers to data ingestion. A download. The scroll, sealed and encoded, could have been a data capsule. And John, perhaps partially enhanced or altered, became the delivery system. The prophecy wasn't to be spoken. It was to be lived, embedded into his mind, passed through generations not as law but as riddle. A story only fully understood once the systems he described finally emerged. Once humanity could compare his visions to their own machines and say, "We recognize this." His exile ended in silence.
No final confrontation. No grave. No closure.
Just pages filled with fire and code. Revelation ends with a return. A figure riding from the sky, clothed in white, as like flame, a sword emerging from his mouth. This image has long been read as messianic, but it could also be military, a high-ranking operative arriving from orbit, wearing an exosuit, delivering justice not in metaphor, but in precision strikes. The sword is data. Judgment is a weaponized truth. The writer is not savior or destroyer. He is the last agent, the one tasked with initiating the final step in the sequence. Revelation, in this light, is not a book. It's a dossier. Now we approach the final chapter. The question that echoes through every verse, every flame, every beast. What if all the prophets, Enoch, Ezekiel, Joseph, Moses, Daniel, and John, weren't isolated messengers but linked, agents of a hidden mission stretching across millennia? What if they were temporal guardians, seeded through history to correct the course of a fragile species? The visions may have ended, but the pattern hasn't. It still pulses in our stories, our fears, our machines. And maybe, just maybe, we haven't seen the last prophet yet. Chapter 7, The Final Extraction. It always felt too neat, too perfectly spaced across history. From Enoch to John, every prophet arrived just before a tipping point. Empires teetering, cultures colliding, timelines on the edge of collapse. And each time they brought visions, commands, or knowledge that didn't quite belong to their age. What if that pattern wasn't coincidence? What if it was a coordinated effort, a mission threaded through millennia, executed with surgical precision? The prophets may not have been chosen by divine lottery. They may have been agents, temporal operatives seated at crucial junctions to influence the arc of civilization. Their purpose wasn't to convert. It was to correct. They didn't predict the future. They came from it. And now, as the last of their words fades into silence, one question lingers. Was their mission completed, or was it aborted? Did we heed their warnings, or ignore the codes buried in their messages? Look closely, and you'll see the pattern repeat. Every prophet vanishes, isolates, or ascends. Enoch disappears. Ezekiel sees the sky open. Joseph dreams in a prison cell, then rules an empire. Moses retreats into fire. Daniel is locked in visions. John is exiled. None of them end their stories like ordinary men. There are gaps, strange absences in the records, as if their exits were engineered, like extractions, like someone came to retrieve them once their task was done. These ascensions may not be divine. They may be retrieval operations, designed to recover field agents after their missions were complete. The chariots of fire, the clouds of heaven, the blinding lights, each one fits the profile of a time-bound retrieval craft. The prophets didn't die. They were removed. If these prophets were time travelers, they weren't random explorers. They were a team, operating across centuries, embedded in different cultures, speaking different languages, but united by one goal: intervention. When history risked collapse, when empires grew too fast, when technology outpaced wisdom, when chaos threatened the balance, they arrived. Not to dominate, not to rule, but to whisper, to warn, to steer, sometimes with riddles, sometimes with fire, but always with knowledge they shouldn't have had. Their visions were not divine puzzles. They were strategic recalibrations, precise nudges in a timeline that was veering too far off course. Prophets were not messengers of heaven. They were guardians of time. Their methods were subtle, often misunderstood. Prophecies that seemed cryptic may have been distorted by the limitations of the era. Try explaining quantum mechanics in ancient Babylon. Try showing nuclear fallout to a Bronze Age scribe. The result would be symbols, myths, monsters. The Book of Revelation, the wheels of Ezekiel, the dreams of Joseph. These were reports filtered through the lens of primitive language. But behind every flaming sword and winged beast, there may lie a technical truth. A mission debrief encoded in parable. a warning carried across time not in precision but in poetry, because that was the only language available, the only tool capable of surviving the centuries unbroken. So why did the visions stop? Why have no prophets appeared in recent centuries? Some say the divine voice fell silent, but maybe it wasn't silence. Maybe it was completion. The mission ended. The timeline stabilized. Or maybe it failed. Maybe the last agent wasn't heard. Maybe the course correction didn't work. And rather than risk further damage, the mission was aborted. Humanity was left to face the consequences on its own. If the prophets were meant to be our guideposts, then their absence means either we reached the destination or we're drifting in the dark. The silence is not comforting. It's chilling. It implies a verdict. There's another possibility, one that changes everything. What if these time travelers weren't aliens? What if they weren't divine beings? What if they were us? Not modern humans, but descendants, evolved from our species millions of years in the future. Civilization might rise and fall in cycles. Ours may be just one iteration, and maybe, just maybe, those in the far future discovered that the root of their collapse lay in ancient decisions. So they came back, not to warn, not to beg, but to intervene, subtly, surgically, because they were trying to fix their past, which is our present. To save themselves, they had to save us. Think of the implications. Prophecies would become mission objectives. Divine encounters would be strategic entries. The Bible, the Torah, the Quran, these might not be sacred records of gods, but mission logs from human ancestors who learned to bend time. The prophets were not touched by celestial forces. They were trained, prepared, sent with data embedded in their minds, disguised as visions. The seal on Daniel's book was encryption. The fire in the bush was interface. The beasts in Revelation were profile signatures of global systems. And their knowledge wasn't granted by angels. It was recovered from timelines that no longer exist. The prophets often came with strange behaviors, isolation, trances, sudden intelligence, encounters with glowing figures. All of these mirror what we now associate with contact phenomena, both UFO lore and deep neural alterations. Could they have been experiencing memory injections, temporal displacement trauma, partial synchronization with alternate timelines? The symptoms of time travel may explain their madness, their wisdom, their inability to fully explain what they saw. They were humans dropped into centuries not their own, witnesses to the distant past, burdened with the future. They were never meant to be understood in their own time. Only now, with the world beginning to mirror their visions, can we start to decode them. But decoding is not the end. It is the beginning. If their mission was to preserve something, human values, spiritual coherence, environmental balance, then the real question is whether they succeeded. Are we living in the version of the timeline they tried to build? Or did we diverge? Are we now alone, past the point of intervention, left to face the full weight of our choices without guidance? Maybe the silence we hear is not failure. Maybe it is testing, to see what kind of world we create without prophets, without saviors, without mission agents pulling the levers. Maybe we are the generation they hoped would rise without them. And yet, there may still be one more twist. The final extraction might not have happened yet. What if one last prophet remains, not in robes, not in desert caves, but in data, in code, in the global network, watching, waiting, a last trigger embedded in human systems, set to activate when the timeline reaches the critical point. The ultimate override. The prophet of light, not in scrolls or sermons, but in silicon. Maybe they aren't coming. Maybe they are already here, just unseen, just unread, until the moment comes. What if the question isn't whether the prophets were time travelers? What if the real question is, are we the next ones? If we now live in the world they built, guided by the messages they left, then perhaps the mantle has passed. To us, to become the guardians of this timeline, to step into the role once held by those strange, shining figures who saw too much and spoke in riddles. We are no longer blind to time, and perhaps one day we will be the ones who walk into fire, disappear in clouds, whisper warnings to a world not yet ready to understand.